Catus Maximus here. This time we have the Icon long stem 3/8" drive hex socket set. They do come in this premium case. Went ahead and picked up this set. I had the standard Pittsburghs. They're a 7-piece set. The Icons are an 8-piece set. The Pittsburghs are about half the price, and on the ball ends I'd recommend just getting the Pittsburgh because the diminishing returns of ball and sockets is they do break pretty easily. So for the higher quality ones, or at least initially, I'd recommend getting the straight stem. They're advertising Chrome Vanadium sockets and S2 steel stems, a couple screws, and then this tray just opens right up. So it is expensive packaging. I complain about packaging just because I'd rather the product be a little bit cheaper because you're using the sockets, not so much the packaging. But they did think about at least this packaging is a little bit more useful than, say, the ratchets. One, this is on a taper, so you can actually knock that out after you've opened it up. And then you can go ahead and pull out the sockets. They do have an extra little tray there, and then they do have this, I wouldn't say snap-on style, but tool truck style trays, which goes right into your toolbox. Let's get this stuff out of here. This thing actually doesn't have any ribs or anything except for that, so you can use it as a type of organizer in your toolbox, or just leave the sockets in this. So at least, if you're paying for the packaging, it might as well be useful, and this is a useful item. It doesn't have any clips or snaps, but it does have a couple of hin posts down here, so the cover does stay on reasonably well, and that is actually a decent little organizer, so at least that's a bonus. As far as these, they are Taiwanese, and they are Harbor Freight's new Icon, which there are now some suspicions that it's contract manufactured by in either Snap-on factories or somebody else's, or some factory that makes major brand tools. And part of what's led to that is I've been reading about the hex standard sockets, and they kind of get rounded out a little bit easily. There's even some YouTube videos about it, and Snap-on sockets have always kind of been like that. So these are straight stem, and so what do you get in the metric set where it's 8 pieces versus 7 on the Pittsburgh? That would be this one right here, the 9mm, which is something you don't use very often, but when you do need a 9, it's really nice to have a 9. These are 5-inch stems, so that is a standard length. It would be 6 inches overall. There's our 5-inch stem, and we got about 1 inch on the socket. Of course, these sockets are broached just a little bit undersized, and then these stems are pressed in, so technically, because there's a hole in the back of the socket, you can press and replace these stems, say, with a bond husk. So if these ever really break, you can, of course, get the lifetime warranty out of Harbor Freight, or, of course, upgrade them yourself, or if it does break, you can always just cut off and grind the section that's still good and press it back into the socket. And it's a neat little tip to kind of get more life out of these in a pinch. As we can see, the stems go all the way down to 6mm, and everything below 6mm, that's the 3, 4, and 5. It's a 6mm stem that they machine down. If we do a little measurement here, I always recommend bond husk, but they don't make sockets like this. We'll go ahead and measure that 5mm, and they're a little bit undersized. Let's take a look at this 4mm here. And that's what I found about these types of sockets, is they do pretty well, but they're not nominally sized. If you want, the thing about hex or socket head cap screws, Allen screws, those types of things, is that they are machine-based fasteners, so they tend to be more precision sized. And the tooling that you use, the tools, which is essentially using a bolt to drive a socket in this sense, really wants to be as close to the nominal size. That means 4mm being exactly 4mm. That way you have a nice tight fit, even if it makes it a little bit more of a hassle. So I do appreciate the quality machining on these. They should have sized them nominally. What I mean by that is I have like a genuine bond husk here, and if we measure it across the flats, we're going to get 4mm, even a little bit. This is probably off by 1/100 of a millimeter. But if we measure across the flats, this 4mm bond husk is nominally sized, so it gives you just that little bit tighter of a fit. There's something else. Bond husk cold roll precision sizes. They use slightly oversized hex stock, and then they actually roll it, so it has a very nice smooth finish as well as being super precision sized. One of the issues with machine tips if we can just get a little look, you can just barely see the scalloping there where a mill cutter went across, as that forms little ridges. And as you use the sockets, those little ridges flatten out, which means it'll become even a little bit looser fitting, a little bit more undersized. Surprisingly enough, those two things, nominal sizing and having a very smooth roll-formed finish, can actually go quite a ways for the longevity of these types of tools. It's one of the reasons a Bond Huss is, basically the snap-on of Allen wrenches. But for 40 bucks at Harbor Freight, they have these. They have both imperial or fractional as well as metric, both in straight shank and ball. All of them are 8-piece sets, and they're all, at least the sale shelf price, 40 bucks a piece. So 160 bucks for a full 32-piece set of these is a reasonable price, and I think they are more reasonably priced than the wrenches. And even though they're just a little bit undersized, they still have a really nice fit in any of the standard fasteners. Surprisingly enough, if you're working on a lot of German vehicles, Volkswagens, working on any types of machinery, equipment, bicycles, then these types of sockets really can come quite in handy. And I do like the fit. We just tried there with a 5mm. The 8mm has a really nice fit, so I do appreciate those. And the reason I recommend these over buying integrated T-handle hex drivers, which one Bond Huss is really popular, is because these are obviously more versatile. You can use them in situations where you need to use ratchets. And then if you want a T-handle style, all you have to do is get a T-handle. And then you have the dual advantage of being able to break the fastener and then put that in the center and be able to spin it out nice and quickly. And that does remind me, let's take a look at the sizing on some of these that aren't machined, that are nominally sized stock. Now it's still just a little bit under, so that would be the biggest criticism, is they could have just sized these a little bit better. Otherwise, the Chrome Vanadium socket end looks just fine. They have nice undercuts to catch the ball detent on ratchets. They are fluted for reduced stress. Pretty deep roll form. I think that's pretty good. And once again, these are all in 3/8 and a decent little tray that actually has a, if I can get this over, it has a little piece of cardboard just to help keep it a little bit more rigid. So since it's diminishing returns, once again, on the ball ends, buying the $40 icons, you're not supposed to break these socketed cap screws with the ball ends, just because it's such a tiny amount of area. You really risk shearing off the wrench right where it's turned down, as well as you're putting a bunch of pressure on a tiny point, which either strips out the wrench or it strips out the inside of these screws. And usually when you strip out these screws, they're in places where it makes it very difficult to extract them. The ball end is, once you've somehow gotten it broken, gotten the base, locking torque off of it, then you can get it out a little bit easier. So in that situation, I'd save the money and just get the Pittsburgh Pros for the ball ends, because it's going to be very little difference in absolute strength over as compared to the icons. Or on the straight shanks, where you're going to be putting in a lot more torque and you can deliver it with the full contact area, then you'll see more of a difference. So that would be really my recommendation, is to get the, if you have your heart set on these, is to get the Pittsburgh Pro ball end ones, and then get the icon straight shanks. And one other thing I was going to test here, I'll pick another random one, the 6. This will be how well they look like. They're pretty centered, but nothing compares to putting them on a power tool. You're not supposed to, these are not impact rated. They do have impact rated ones. Get that a little closer. Well, because it's on, if I hold the tip, this thing goes, there we go. You can see that it's not wobbling around very far. Let me try another one. Oh, the hog ring gets caught in those little undercuts. I'll try the 9mm here. What can happen is that the broaching for the square can be not centered with the broaching for the hex, and then you start to notice that when you're spinning it out with the T-handles, the wrench kind of wobbles around. It's a little bit of a pet peeve. If we can get this to focus for me. This one's not quite perfect, but it's still pretty good. If it's stabilized in the fastener, you're not going to notice any wobble. So that's always nice to see, is that they did pay attention to that. It also indicates that these shanks are straight. And it really sucks to get one of these where there's a bend in the shank. Then it's just really all over the place. So overall, for 40 bucks for an 8-piece set, I think that's totally a reasonable price. You are spending a little bit more money on the packaging. It'd be nice if they were like $36.99 or something like that. But I'll go for it just because the packaging is useful by itself as an organizer aside from the tools, which is a smart thing to do. If you want to make nice packaging, make it so it's not so wasteful and such a throwaway item. And I will mention, I kind of had the incentive to buy these because I went into Harbor Freight, and at least my local store had donated all their masks, all their respirators, and all their nitrile gloves to local hospitals and medical facilities. So I did appreciate the Harbor Freight did that, so I went ahead and bought these. And at least they're properly oiled, so they won't be rusting in the packaging or anything like that. Anyway, I really appreciate everybody watching and subscribing, and if you haven't subscribed, please do. Until next time, Catus Maximus out.